Sometimes the smallest shadow is the one standing between a kingdom and disaster. Crystal chandeliers poured warm golden light across the vast ballroom of Crystal Moon Palace, where polished marble reflected every elegant movement beneath a ceiling painted with the history of forgotten Alpha Kings. Hundreds of nobles filled the grand hall in shimmering gowns and tailored formal uniforms, their laughter blending with the gentle melody of a royal orchestra as servants moved gracefully between endless rows of silver tables covered with crystal glasses, fresh white lilies, and elaborate feasts prepared for the kingdom's most important celebration. No one noticed Emily Carter. At 23 years old, the young Omega Waitress had already learned that becoming invisible was sometimes easier than asking to be seen. She carried another silver tray through the crowded ballroom with practiced precision, offering polite smiles that were rarely returned. Some guests accepted a glass without looking at her face. Others continued conversations as though she were simply another piece of furniture inside the magnificent palace. Emily never complained. She quietly thanked each guest, adjusted another centerpiece, straightened another folded napkin, and continued her work with calm dignity. Around her neck rested a simple crescent moon pendant that disappeared beneath the collar of her gray uniform every time she lowered her head. Few people had ever asked where it came from. Even fewer cared. Across the ballroom, enormous oak doors slowly opened, and every conversation instantly faded into respectful silence. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood entered with steady confidence, dressed in a perfectly tailored black royal suit embroidered with silver threads that caught the candlelight like flowing moonlight. The silver wolf crest over his chest represented generations of rulers who had protected the northern territories, yet his expression carried neither arrogance nor pride. His calm blue eyes acknowledged everyone present with quiet authority instead of demanding admiration. Nobles bowed. Royal advisors stepped aside. Palace guards stood even straighter as Ethan walked toward the ceremonial platform prepared for the evening banquet. Emily glanced up for only a second before returning to her work. She had seen the Alpha King from a distance before, but tonight something felt different. It was not the celebration. It was not the music. It was the people. Her eyes drifted naturally across the crowded ballroom, studying tiny details most others ignored. One nobleman adjusted the cuff of his jacket 3 separate times while never touching the food before him. Another quietly exchanged a brief glance with someone across the room before looking away too quickly. A woman seated near one of the marble columns held her untouched wine glass in her left hand despite every place setting being arranged for the right. None of these actions seemed dangerous alone. Together they formed a rhythm Emily could not explain. Her grandmother had always told her that real danger rarely announced itself with loud voices. It whispered through patterns no one else noticed. Emily slowed her pace, pretending to replace a crystal glass while watching reflections inside the polished silver serving tray. 5 distinguished guests appeared completely relaxed, yet every few moments each one subtly confirmed the location of another with almost invisible eye contact. They never spoke directly. They never approached each other. Still, something connected them. Emily's heartbeat became slightly faster. She reminded herself she was only a waitress. Palace security handled important matters. Nobles handled politics. Alpha guards protected the king. She should continue serving dinner exactly as instructed. Yet every instinct told her that tonight would not end the way everyone expected. As Ethan greeted ambassadors from neighboring territories with composed courtesy, Emily noticed another figure emerging from a service corridor near the rear of the ballroom. The man wore the plain uniform of a palace servant and carried folded linens. But something about his posture immediately felt unfamiliar. Every servant in Crystal Moon Palace learned to walk with relaxed shoulders while balancing trays. This man moved like someone measuring distances instead of delivering supplies. His footsteps remained perfectly controlled. His attention stayed fixed on the ceremonial platform. Emily stopped beside a marble pillar, lowering her tray just enough to watch him through the reflection of a crystal vase. The orchestra continued playing. Noble guests resumed smiling conversations. Laughter filled the magnificent hall once again. No one else appeared to notice anything unusual, but Emily could no longer ignore the feeling growing inside her. Somewhere beneath the beauty of the royal banquet, hidden beneath music, elegance, and celebration, destiny had quietly begun moving toward the Alpha King. Emily kept walking, but every step felt heavier than the last. She moved from table to table with the same graceful rhythm expected of every palace waitress, carefully refilling crystal glasses and replacing empty serving plates. Yet her attention never drifted far from the 6 people who now occupied her thoughts. The 5 distinguished guests remained scattered across the ballroom exactly as before, each appearing perfectly relaxed. One laughed politely with a visiting ambassador. Another admired an enormous mural painted across the eastern wall. A third complimented the palace musicians as though nothing unusual existed beneath the celebration. To everyone else, they looked like respected nobles enjoying an elegant evening. To Emily, they looked like pieces of a puzzle that had not yet revealed its full picture. Her grandmother had once smiled while teaching her that danger almost never arrived in a straight line. It circled patiently until every piece stood exactly where it belonged. Emily had never forgotten those words. As she placed another polished silver pitcher onto a serving table, she quietly studied the reflections dancing across its curved surface. Reflections often revealed what direct observation concealed. Through the distorted mirror of polished metal, she noticed one of the nobles gently adjusting a sapphire ring with 2 fingers before lowering his hand onto the table. Across the ballroom, another guest responded by folding a linen napkin with unusual precision before placing it beside an untouched glass. Seconds later, a third guest slowly turned his chair several inches toward the ceremonial platform, where Alpha King Ethan Blackwood continued greeting honored visitors with calm confidence. None of the movements appeared suspicious by themselves. Together, they formed an unmistakable sequence. Emily felt a quiet chill travel through her chest. She resisted the urge to stare. Instead, she collected empty glasses while allowing her eyes to observe naturally. Palace servants were expected to notice everything except matters of importance. That expectation suddenly worked in her favor. People rarely paid attention to someone carrying dishes. They assumed she belonged to the background. They assumed she could not understand what unfolded around her. Emily reached another serving station near the western side of the ballroom, where fresh desserts waited beneath silver covers. Beside her, 2 experienced waiters whispered excitedly about the royal banquet, wondering whether the Alpha King might announce new alliances before the evening ended. Emily considered sharing her concern, but hesitated. What could she possibly say? That 5 respected nobles looked at each other too carefully? That a servant walked differently than everyone else? She imagined their confused expressions before deciding to remain silent. Fear without proof could easily become embarrassment. Even so, her instincts refused to settle. Across the ballroom, Ethan accepted greetings from an elderly governor whose family had served the crown for decades. The Alpha King listened patiently, offering genuine attention to every guest regardless of status. Emily noticed how naturally he thanked palace employees whenever they approached with refreshments. Unlike many nobles, he looked directly at the people serving him instead of beyond them. It was a small gesture, almost invisible amid the grandeur surrounding him, yet Emily found herself unexpectedly respecting him for it. At that exact moment, the unfamiliar servant emerged once again from another side corridor carrying neatly folded white linens. His uniform remained perfectly ordinary, but this time Emily caught something different. Every palace servant wore a small silver clasp, fastened on the left side of the collar. His clasp rested on the right. Most guests would never recognize such a tiny mistake. Emily had fastened hundreds of those uniforms herself while helping prepare formal events. She knew every detail by memory. Her breathing slowed as her mind assembled another piece of the growing pattern. The disguised servant never stopped moving, yet his eyes repeatedly measured the distance to the ceremonial platform with quiet calculation. Meanwhile, the 5 nobles gradually shifted their conversations, subtly creating open pathways through the crowded ballroom without attracting attention. Guests naturally stepped into those newly created spaces, unknowingly widening the route toward the Alpha King. Emily tightened her grip on the silver tray she carried. She realized she was no longer witnessing coincidence. She was watching preparation. Music continued flowing through the magnificent hall while laughter echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. Outside the towering windows, the evening sky darkened into deep shades of blue, and moonlight slowly blended with the warm glow of thousands of candles. Everything looked peaceful. Everything sounded perfect. Yet hidden beneath polished manners and elegant smiles, an invisible clock seemed to be counting toward a single moment only Emily could feel approaching. She drew one slow breath, lifted her tray once more, and quietly altered her path through the ballroom, placing herself a little closer to the Alpha King without attracting a single curious glance. If her instincts proved wrong, no one would ever know she had worried. But if they proved right, every second beginning now would matter. Emily continued moving through the ballroom with measured confidence, matching the quiet rhythm expected of every palace waitress. Yet her mind refused to leave the invisible pattern unfolding around her. Every polished surface became another mirror. Every crystal glass reflected another angle of the celebration. Every elegant conversation hid another opportunity to observe without being noticed. The music drifted gently beneath the soaring ceiling, while noble families exchanged pleasant stories, completely unaware that one ordinary waitress had become the only person truly watching the room. The disguised servant disappeared behind a marble column for only a few seconds before emerging once more from a different corridor. That alone should have been impossible. Palace employees followed carefully assigned routes during royal ceremonies to avoid confusion. Emily knew those procedures by heart because she had repeated them every day for nearly 3 years. She quietly stepped toward a refreshment table and pretended to straighten a silver pitcher while allowing the reflection to guide her eyes. The unfamiliar servant paused beside a decorative statue without speaking to anyone. His folded linens remained perfectly arranged, yet he never looked toward the dining tables that actually required service. Instead, his attention briefly shifted toward one of the 5 distinguished guests. The exchange lasted no more than a heartbeat, a slight nod, nothing more. But the noble immediately lifted his glass with his left hand before setting it down exactly where the candlelight created the brightest reflection. Moments later, another of the 5 adjusted the position of his chair by only a few inches. Emily felt certainty replace suspicion. They were communicating through movements so ordinary that no guest would ever question them. She remembered something her grandmother had once demonstrated using carved wooden game pieces on a small kitchen table. A clever player never moved every piece at once. The board itself remained calm until the final move made every earlier choice suddenly meaningful. Emily had laughed at the lesson as a child. Tonight she finally understood it. She carefully lifted another tray and walked toward the eastern side of the ballroom, quietly placing herself where she could see both the ceremonial platform and the nearest service hallway. The Alpha King continued greeting guests with the same composed warmth, listening more than speaking, making every visitor feel acknowledged. Emily admired how naturally he carried responsibility without seeking attention. It made the growing uneasiness inside her even harder to ignore. Suddenly she noticed something else. One palace guard stationed near the entrance stepped away after receiving a polite request from an elderly noblewoman who needed assistance finding her escort. Another guard moved toward the musicians after a young page accidentally dropped a bundle of sheet music. Both situations appeared completely harmless. Even so, they left small openings that had not existed only moments earlier. Emily slowly counted the positions around the ceremonial platform. The pathways leading toward the Alpha King were becoming less crowded, almost as though the flow of guests was gently being redirected without anyone realizing it. She resisted the temptation to rush forward. Acting without certainty could create unnecessary panic. Instead, she quietly crossed into a nearby service corridor where fresh trays were prepared before returning to the ballroom. The corridor was empty except for neatly stacked linens and rows of polished silver serving dishes. Then she saw it. Hanging on a wooden hook beside the storage shelves was an authentic palace servant cloak. One was missing. Emily stared at the empty space for several silent seconds. Every uniform issued before the banquet had been carefully counted that afternoon. She personally remembered placing that cloak on the hook. Her heartbeat quickened. Someone had entered the servant area after preparations were complete. She gently touched the remaining uniforms, confirming nothing else had been disturbed. No signs of struggle. No scattered supplies. Only one missing cloak. She closed her eyes briefly, assembling every observation from the past hour. 5 coordinated nobles. A servant wearing his collar clasped incorrectly. Secret movements through restricted corridors. Palace guards unintentionally drawn away. A missing uniform. None of those details alone proved anything. Together, they painted a picture impossible to ignore. Emily opened her eyes with quiet resolve. She understood that no one would believe an Omega Waitress accusing respected nobles based only on instinct and careful observation. She had no title, no authority, and no reputation powerful enough to interrupt a royal ceremony. Yet she also understood something even more important. She did not need permission to pay attention. As the orchestra reached the end of a graceful melody and applause echoed through the magnificent ballroom, the disguised servant stepped once again into the golden light, now standing closer to the ceremonial platform than ever before. The 5 nobles remained perfectly calm, each exactly where they needed to be. Emily drew one slow breath, lowered the tray from her hands, and silently chose that if destiny expected someone to notice what everyone else had missed, then she would no longer remain only the invisible waitress standing at the edge of history. Emily stepped away from the marble pillar just as the orchestra welcomed the beginning of the evening's ceremonial toast. Every noble turned naturally toward the raised platform, where Alpha King Ethan Blackwood prepared to thank the honored guests. The shift of attention created exactly the opening she had feared. Conversations quieted. Crystal glasses were lifted. Palace servants gracefully withdrew from the center of the ballroom according to tradition. Everyone moved exactly as they had rehearsed. Everyone except one man. The disguised servant did not retreat with the others. Instead, he calmly adjusted his direction by only a few feet, blending into the flow of movement while drawing steadily closer to the ceremonial platform. Emily could no longer pretend she was uncertain. Every instinct inside her settled into remarkable clarity. She placed her silver tray upon a nearby serving table and walked forward with measured confidence, refusing to attract unnecessary attention. Her expression remained calm, almost gentle, as though she were simply delivering another request from the royal kitchen. The 5 distinguished nobles continued their perfectly ordinary conversations, yet each occupied a position that quietly limited the view of nearby palace guards. It was not obvious. It did not appear suspicious. But Emily recognized the invisible pattern now unfolding exactly as she had imagined. She reached the edge of the ceremonial platform just as the unfamiliar servant approached from the opposite side, carrying neatly folded white linens. Their eyes met for the first time. For a single heartbeat, surprise crossed the stranger's face before disappearing behind another polite expression. Emily smiled with the quiet professionalism expected of every waitress. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I believe the palace laundry room is in the opposite direction." Her voice was calm enough that only the disguised servant heard her. He answered with a courteous nod, yet he did not change direction. Instead, he attempted to continue walking past her with steady confidence. Emily shifted one small step to her left. The movement appeared completely natural, almost graceful, yet it placed her directly between the stranger and the Alpha King. Several nearby guests assumed she was simply making room for another servant. None of them realized she had quietly closed the final path leading toward the ceremonial platform. The disguised servant adjusted again, this time choosing another angle. Emily mirrored the movement with equal precision. It almost resembled an elegant dance performed without music. Neither person raised a voice. Neither displayed anger. Yet an invisible contest unfolded beneath the golden light of the crystal chandeliers. Ethan noticed the unusual exchange from the corner of his eye. His conversation paused for only a brief moment before continuing, although his attention remained quietly fixed upon the young waitress who had unexpectedly stepped into an unusual position. Emily's breathing remained slow and controlled. Long ago, her grandmother had taught her that true balance began with stillness rather than speed. A person who understood balance could redirect movement without force. She had practiced those lessons countless mornings beside a peaceful stream, never imagining they would one day matter inside the kingdom's greatest palace. As the disguised servant attempted another calm step forward, Emily gently turned her shoulders while placing one hand against the edge of the folded linens. The motion was almost effortless. Instead of resisting him, she guided his momentum harmlessly toward an open space beside a marble column where he instinctively took another step to regain balance. The folded linen slipped from his arms and drifted softly onto the polished floor. A small silver object hidden beneath the fabric rolled into the candlelight. It was not dangerous by itself, yet it clearly did not belong with palace supplies. Several nearby guests immediately looked down in confusion. The disguised servant hesitated for the first time that evening. Palace guards, noticing the unexpected object, approached without urgency, but with growing curiosity. Ethan quietly raised one hand, signaling everyone to remain calm. No panic spread through the ballroom. The orchestra gently lowered its volume before stopping altogether as conversations faded into puzzled silence. Emily stepped back respectfully, keeping her hands visible and her posture composed. She had not accused anyone. She had not caused chaos. She had simply interrupted a pattern before it reached its destination. The 5 distinguished nobles exchanged the briefest glances before quickly returning to expressions of polite surprise, but Emily noticed them all. An elderly royal advisor standing near the front of the platform stared at her with widening eyes instead of watching the disguised servant. His attention rested entirely on the movement she had just used. His expression slowly changed from confusion to disbelief, as though he had witnessed something impossible. Ethan also looked directly at Emily now, no longer seeing an anonymous waitress carrying silver trays through the palace corridors. For the first time that evening, the Alpha King's calm blue eyes lingered on the young Omega, as though searching for an answer hidden somewhere within a memory he could not quite reach, while the silent ballroom waited for someone to explain how one invisible waitress had sensed what an entire palace had failed to see. Silence settled over the grand ballroom so completely that the gentle crackle of candle flames became impossible to ignore. Noble guests looked from the unfamiliar servant to the young Omega waitress, and then toward Alpha King Ethan Blackwood, uncertain which sight deserved their attention most. Palace guards respectfully collected the small silver object that had rolled across the polished marble floor while the disguised servant quietly accepted questioning without resistance. The evening had not dissolved into panic. Instead, it had become something far more unsettling. Questions filled every corner of the magnificent hall, and no one possessed immediate answers. Emily lowered her eyes, expecting that her role in the strange interruption had ended. She instinctively reached for the silver tray she had left behind, hoping to disappear once again into the orderly rhythm of palace service. Before she could take more than 2 steps, a calm voice stopped her. "Please remain where you are." Ethan's words were neither loud nor demanding, yet every conversation ceased instantly. Emily slowly turned. For the first time since she had begun working inside Crystal Moon Palace, the Alpha King was looking directly at her rather than through the countless servants surrounding him. His expression revealed curiosity more than suspicion. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet determination to understand what everyone else had overlooked. Emily respectfully bowed her head. "Your Majesty," she answered softly. Ethan descended the short marble steps from the ceremonial platform, closing the distance without haste. Every noble instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path between the ruler and the young waitress. Emily suddenly became painfully aware that hundreds of eyes now rested upon her. Only moments earlier, she had been invisible. Now she stood at the center of the grand ballroom beneath towering crystal chandeliers. "What made you step forward?" Ethan asked. His voice remained calm, inviting honesty rather than demanding explanation. Emily hesitated. She knew how impossible her answer would sound. "The room changed," she finally replied. Several nobles exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan remained silent, encouraging her to continue. "People were moving naturally," Emily explained. But 6 individuals moved with purpose. The differences were very small. A misplaced uniform clasp, reflections in polished silver, familiar palace routines that suddenly no longer matched. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they created a pattern. "Hey!" Thoughtful murmurs spread through the gathered guests. Ethan listened without interrupting. His attention never drifted from Emily's face, studying not only her words, but also the quiet confidence with which she spoke. Before anyone else could respond, an elderly royal advisor slowly stepped forward from among the council members. His silver hair framed a weathered face marked by decades of service, yet his eyes held the unmistakable excitement of someone who had just rediscovered a forgotten page of history. He did not look toward the disguised servant. He did not examine the collected object lying upon the velvet cloth held by a palace guard. Instead, he looked only at Emily. "Young lady," he said gently, "would you please show me the movement you used a few moments ago?" Confusion spread across the ballroom. Emily blinked in surprise. "It was only a simple adjustment," she answered quietly. "Please," the advisor repeated with respectful patience. Emily glanced toward Ethan. The Alpha King gave a small nod. She stepped into the open space beside the marble platform and carefully repeated the gentle turning motion she had used earlier. There was nothing dramatic about it. She shifted her weight, relaxed her shoulders, guided one hand through the air, and completed the movement with effortless balance before returning to a natural standing position. The entire demonstration lasted only a few seconds. Yet the elderly advisor drew in a slow breath as though he had witnessed something extraordinary. His hands trembled ever so slightly. "That cannot be," he whispered almost to himself. Several council members looked toward him with confusion. "Lord Aldrin," one noble asked carefully, "do you recognize something?" The elderly advisor did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed upon Emily with growing disbelief. "Where did you learn to move like that?" he finally asked. Emily instinctively touched the small crescent moon pendant hidden beneath the collar of her uniform before realizing what she had done. "My grandmother taught me," she replied honestly. "She always said balance was more important than strength. We practiced every morning when I was a little girl. I never thought it was anything unusual." The advisor's gaze dropped to the silver chain around her neck. Emily gently lifted the pendant into the candlelight without understanding why his expression had changed so completely. The crescent moon reflected a soft silver glow that seemed almost timeless beneath the palace chandeliers. Lord Aldrin stared at the ancient symbol as memories long buried behind history awakened in his eyes. Ethan noticed the transformation immediately. "You know that pendant," the Alpha King observed quietly. The elderly advisor slowly nodded without looking away. "I know far more than the pendant, Your Majesty," he answered in a voice filled with astonishment. "If my memory has not betrayed me, then tonight we may have witnessed the return of something this kingdom believed had vanished many years ago." Lord Aldrin stepped closer with remarkable care, as though even the sound of his footsteps might disturb a memory sleeping beneath the polished marble floor. Every noble watched in complete silence while Emily held the crescent moon pendant in the palm of her hand. The silver surface reflected the warm candlelight, revealing delicate engravings that had faded with time but had never completely disappeared. The elderly advisor lifted a trembling hand without touching the pendant itself. "This symbol belonged to the Guardian clan," he said quietly. "For generations they protected the throne not through titles or power, but through observation, wisdom, and perfect balance. Their greatest strength was seeing what everyone else overlooked." A wave of astonishment spread through the ballroom. Several older nobles exchanged uncertain looks, searching distant memories for stories they had once dismissed as legends. Younger guests remained completely still, hearing the name for the first time. Emily looked down at the pendant with genuine surprise. "My grandmother never told me anything about a guardian clan," she admitted softly. "She only said these lessons were family traditions that should never be forgotten." Lord Aldrin smiled with quiet sadness. "Then she protected the secret exactly as she promised." Ethan's expression grew. "Thoughtful. You knew her?" he asked. The elderly advisor slowly nodded. "Many years ago, before Your Majesty was born, I met the last recognized guardian during a royal council. She possessed the same calm eyes, the same graceful movements, and the same habit of noticing details that escaped everyone else." His gaze returned to Emily. "When you stepped into that servant's path, you did not rely upon force. You redirected intention with balance. That was the Silver Moon Guardian art. I believed it had disappeared forever." Emily struggled to absorb every word. The quiet exercises beside a stream during her childhood, the endless reminders to remain patient, the gentle corrections whenever she lost her balance. All of it suddenly carried a meaning she had never imagined. She remembered her grandmother smiling whenever Emily asked why those lessons mattered. The answer had always been the same. "One day your heart will understand before your mind does." Standing inside the magnificent ballroom, Emily finally understood those mysterious words. Ethan looked at the young Omega with renewed respect. "You protected this palace tonight without seeking recognition," he said. "You acted because you believed it was the right thing to do." Emily lowered her eyes. "I only noticed something that did not belong, Your Majesty. Anyone would have done the same." A gentle smile appeared on Ethan's face. "Not everyone notices what you notice." The silence that followed carried warmth instead of uncertainty. One by one, the nobles who had barely acknowledged the quiet waitress earlier that evening began looking at her differently. The dismissive expressions disappeared, replaced by curiosity and respect. Emily remained exactly as she had been before, wearing the same gray uniform and the same simple apron, yet the room itself had changed around her. Lord Aldrin turned toward the gathered council. "History has a remarkable way of returning when a kingdom needs it most," he said. "Perhaps destiny has simply been waiting for the right moment." Beyond the towering palace windows, the full moon rose higher above the northern territories, bathing Crystal Moon Palace in soft silver light. Far from the celebration, beyond the forests and mountains that marked the kingdom's distant frontier, a solitary traveler wearing a weathered cloak paused beneath the moonlit sky. The traveler quietly looked toward the glowing palace on the horizon before whispering with calm certainty, "The final guardian has revealed herself." Without another word, the mysterious figure continued walking into the endless night as the first chapter of a forgotten legacy quietly came back to life. The grand ballroom slowly came back to life, but nothing felt quite the same. Conversations resumed in careful whispers instead of confident laughter, and every glance that passed through the room eventually found its way back to Emily Carter. Only an hour earlier, she had been another anonymous Omega waitress, quietly carrying silver trays between elegant tables. Now she stood beside the ceremonial platform, while the greatest nobles of the Northern Territories looked at her with curiosity instead of indifference. Emily shifted uncomfortably beneath their attention. Recognition had never been something she sought. She simply wanted the evening to end peacefully so everyone could return home safely. Lord Aldrin requested that one of the royal attendants bring an ancient wooden chest from the palace archives. Several minutes later, two attendants carefully carried the beautifully carved chest into the ballroom and placed it upon a polished oak table before the royal council. Dust covered the bronze corners, suggesting it had remained unopened for many years. The elderly advisor slowly lifted the heavy lid, revealing several carefully preserved scrolls, faded journals, and a collection of ancient silver emblems. Every movement carried the weight of history. Ethan watched in thoughtful silence while the gathered nobles leaned forward with growing anticipation. Lord Aldrin unfolded one fragile parchment across the table. The aged document displayed detailed illustrations of ceremonial clothing, forgotten family crests, and the symbols of the Guardian clan. Near the center of the parchment rested a drawing that caused Emily to quietly catch her breath. It was identical to the crescent moon, pendant hanging around her neck. The engraving, the curved shape, even the smallest decorative lines matched perfectly. Emily instinctively reached toward the pendant once again, almost unable to believe what she was seeing. "This cannot be coincidence," Lord Aldrin said gently. Every Guardian family carried this symbol, but only one bloodline wore the complete crescent with the hidden silver star engraved inside the curve. Emily carefully turned her pendant over. For the first time in her life, she noticed a tiny star carved so delicately into the silver that it became visible only beneath direct candlelight. Her grandmother had never pointed it out. She simply smiled whenever Emily asked about the necklace and reminded her never to remove it. Ethan stepped closer to the ancient parchment before looking back at Emily. "Your grandmother understood far more than she ever revealed," he said quietly. Emily nodded slowly, remembering countless evenings spent beside a peaceful stream where an elderly woman patiently corrected every careless movement, reminding her that true strength never hurried and true courage never announced itself. Those memories no longer felt like ordinary childhood lessons. They felt like carefully protected pieces of a forgotten inheritance. One elderly noble lowered his head with visible regret. "I remember seeing your grandmother many years ago," he admitted softly. "People whispered strange stories about her family. We dismissed them as old legends. We were wrong." His words encouraged others to speak with equal honesty. Several nobles quietly acknowledged that they had overlooked Emily because they believed an Omega Waitress could never play an important role inside the royal palace. None attempted to defend their earlier assumptions. The realization itself seemed to humble them. Emily looked around the magnificent ballroom, seeing familiar faces that had ignored her for years. Surprisingly, she felt no desire for revenge or satisfaction. Her grandmother had always taught that respect earned through kindness lasted far longer than respect demanded through pride. Ethan noticed the quiet peace in her expression and understood something important. A person given unexpected recognition often revealed their true character in that very moment. Emily had gained the attention of the entire kingdom, yet she remained exactly the same humble young woman who had carefully polished crystal glasses only a short time before. The Alpha King smiled with quiet admiration. In that instant, he realized the Guardian legacy had survived not because it had been hidden by powerful warriors or wealthy nobles, but because it had been entrusted to someone whose heart valued service above recognition. Beneath the silver light filtering through the towering palace windows, history had not simply returned. It had chosen the one person humble enough to carry it forward. The ancient parchment remained open upon the oak table as candlelight shimmered across its faded ink, but the attention of the entire ballroom had shifted from forgotten history to the young woman standing quietly beside it. Emily Carter still wore the same neatly pressed gray waitress uniform, and the white apron tied around her waist had not changed since the banquet began. The only difference was the way people now looked at her. Servants who had worked beside her every day smiled with quiet pride. Noble families who had once overlooked her lowered their eyes with genuine respect. The atmosphere inside Crystal Moon Palace had transformed without a single command being spoken. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood slowly stepped toward the royal platform, where a velvet cushion rested beneath the kingdom's silver wolf crest. Upon it lay a finely crafted emblem reserved for individuals whose loyalty and courage had brought honor to the Northern Territories. The symbol had been presented only a handful of times during Ethan's reign, and every member of the royal council immediately recognized its meaning. Lord Aldrin watched silently, understanding the importance of the decision before it was even announced. Ethan lifted the silver crest into his hands before turning to face Emily. His expression remained calm, yet warmth filled his eyes. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice carrying naturally through the magnificent ballroom. "You entered this hall expecting nothing more than another evening of honest work. You sought no reward, no recognition, and no praise. When others celebrated, you remained observant. When others overlooked the smallest details, you paid attention. When uncertainty appeared, you chose responsibility instead of hesitation." Emily stood speechless, unable to imagine that the Alpha King was speaking directly to her before the entire kingdom's highest nobility. Ethan continued with quiet conviction. "True service is not measured by rank or title. It is measured by character. Tonight you reminded everyone gathered here that wisdom may appear in the most unexpected places." He gently fastened the silver wolf crest onto the upper part of Emily's uniform beside the simple fabric of her apron. The polished emblem reflected the warm light of the chandeliers, creating a striking contrast between royal honor and humble clothing. No elaborate ceremony followed. None was needed. The gesture itself carried more meaning than any formal proclamation. Emily looked down at the crest with visible emotion before lifting her eyes toward the Alpha King. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I do not know if I deserve this." Ethan smiled gently. "You never asked for it. That is exactly why you do." A quiet wave of appreciation spread across the ballroom. One after another, members of the royal council respectfully inclined their heads toward Emily. Soon the noble families followed. Palace servants exchanged surprised smiles as they witnessed something they never expected to see. The invisible waitress who had quietly carried silver trays only hours earlier was now receiving the respect of an entire kingdom without abandoning her humility. Emily instinctively returned every gesture with equal respect, bowing first to the Alpha King, then to Lord Aldrin, and finally to the assembled guests. She accepted honor with the same quiet grace she had once carried crystal glasses through crowded hallways. That simple response seemed to impress everyone even more. Lord Aldrin smiled knowingly. "The Guardian bloodline has not merely survived," he said softly. Its greatest lesson has survived with it. Ethan looked across the grand ballroom. Before addressing everyone present one final time, let tonight be remembered not as the evening we uncovered an ancient legacy, but as the evening we remembered that greatness is never determined by status alone. The strongest foundation of this kingdom has always been the integrity of ordinary people willing to do what is right. His words settled deeply into every heart inside the palace. Beyond the towering windows, moonlight washed over Crystal Moon Palace with quiet brilliance, while Emily stood beneath its silver glow wearing both her simple waitress uniform and the royal wolf crest together, a living reminder that destiny often chooses those who never seek attention, but who quietly become extraordinary by remaining true to themselves. The celebration gradually came to a peaceful close as musicians returned to gentle melodies that echoed through the magnificent halls of Crystal Moon Palace. One by one, noble families departed beneath the soft glow of silver lanterns, carrying home stories that would be shared for generations. Yet the greatest story of the evening was not about a royal banquet, an ancient symbol, or a forgotten legend. It was about a young Omega waitress who had quietly chosen to pay attention when everyone else was distracted. Emily Carter stepped onto the highest balcony overlooking the Northern Territories, where cool evening air carried the scent of evergreen forests stretching far beyond the palace walls. The silver wolf crest rested beside the crescent moon pendant upon her uniform, two symbols from different histories now united upon the same person. She gently placed one hand against the ancient pendant, remembering her grandmother's patient smile, the quiet mornings beside the stream, and the simple lessons that had shaped every decision she made without ever revealing their true purpose. Behind her, the balcony doors opened softly. Ethan Blackwood stepped outside without ceremony, leaving the formal atmosphere of the ballroom behind. For several peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. They simply looked across the moonlit kingdom together. Countless lights shimmered below like distant stars scattered across the valleys, while the towering mountains stood silently beneath the full moon that had watched over generations before them. "The kingdom feels different tonight," Ethan said quietly. Emily smiled. "Perhaps the kingdom has always been the same. Maybe tonight people simply noticed what was already there." Ethan considered her words before nodding with quiet admiration. "That sounds like something your grandmother would have said." Emily laughed softly. "It probably is." The peaceful silence returned, comfortable and unforced. Neither spoke about destiny, titles, or ancient bloodlines. Instead, they shared the simple understanding that true strength had nothing to do with being feared. It came from protecting others without expecting recognition in return. Far beyond the palace, where the Northern Territories met endless forests and forgotten mountain trails, the mysterious traveler continued the lonely journey beneath the moonlit sky. The traveler paused once more upon a distant ridge and looked back toward the glowing palace on the horizon. A faint smile appeared before disappearing beneath the shadow of a weathered hood. The ancient guardian legacy had awakened once again, and somewhere beyond the borders of the kingdom, others would eventually hear that the final descendant had stepped into the light. New challenges would come. New choices would have to be made. But tonight belonged to hope rather than fear. Back on the palace balcony, Emily quietly looked toward the horizon with confidence she had never known before. She was still the same humble young woman who believed kindness mattered, who noticed the smallest details, and who chose compassion before pride. The difference was that now the kingdom finally saw her for who she had always been. Sometimes history changes because of powerful rulers. Sometimes it changes because of remarkable heroes. And sometimes it changes because one ordinary person refuses to ignore the quiet truth standing right in front of them. If this story reminded you that courage can be quiet, kindness can change destiny, and true strength is revealed through character, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it with someone who believes that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things, and leave a comment telling us which moment touched your heart the most and what you think awaits Emily Carter and Alpha King Ethan Blackwood in the next chapter.